my Gloranthan materials are, from your perspective, horrifyingly archaeological.
No, don't worry.
So
This
it's
is
all just scattershot here and there, what I picked up along the way as I went. And there are crucial things that are just 101 to you and cohort that, to me, I have fragmentary contact with. So
it was the same for all of us. In some ways, it was one of the bizarrenesses of the way I was introduced to RuneQuest and Glorantha was that everyone writing for that setting assumed that you all knew White Bear and Red Moon and Nomad Gods.
Absolutely.
And I did.
No, of course not. I mean,
and by the time I wanted to, you couldn't find out what was.
They were completely unfindable. I was. I also found again that people who had a journalistic understanding of the magazines didn't really quite understand what it was for someone who was 16 in 1980. We simply weren't going to have the full library of magazines. No. I actually have a not that bad assortment of Worm's Footnotes, the originals, but not many, right? A few. Pure happenstance that I have the one with the dragon dicks, which is, of course, the big classic for, the traits that eventually would show up in Pendragon and so on. But it's pure happenstance that I happen to get that one. It's not, that I was systematically reading them issue by issue.
No, none of us were.
Yeah. So anyway, that said, I have not, unlike you, I have not caught up in that sense.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. If you pop to the Chaosium website today, you'll be able to download every issue of Worm's Footnotes, 1 to 14.
Yeah.
$25 the lot as PDFs.
Which is an amazing deal. That's just incredible.
I know, it is.
And on the other hand, there's also the weeping, crying, and remorse. I mean, if you look at the back of I think it's the RuneQuest Companion.
Yep.
If you look at the back of that, there's a little form that you fill out saying what you want more of.
What do you want to see next?
You know what? I never cut it out and sent it, but I wrote in it. And you know what it says there? It says more Lunar Empire info !
Yay!
Okay.
One of us.
It never showed up. Yeah, I mean, that's 1980. It never showed up in my game store looking like the RuneQuest Companion. So I never got it. And so people could point and say, well, what about the Worm's Footprints? And I'd be like, dude, I saw 2 issues of that on the fucking shelves.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, and RuneQuest was not a game I was playing regularly. I was reading it and thumbing it and eating my heart out over it, but I wasn't able to play it much. So there's other aspects of playing fantasy at that time, which you may or may not empathize with. In the States, fantasy fans, people who read Tanith Lee, people who read Fritz Leiber, and this is before Deities and Demigods. People didn't learn this shit from gaming. And so we read it, we knew it because we read it. To us, fantasy role-playing had dropped the ball. And you weren't going to get the fantasy we knew and loved. You weren't going to be able to make the fantasy we knew and loved, which meant doing it your way, with any game currently available.
Yeah.
And we bagged it. We said, fuck it. Fantasy role-playing is broken. It's for fanfic. It's not for doing it.
Yeah.
And fuck it. And I didn't get back to role-playing until Champions came out, because Champions actually was about making your own damn comic book. And so the early Champions was.
Yes.
So that's when I got back into gaming, was with the superheroes, with people who were inspired by off-the-leash comic book creators.
Yeah.
And I didn't get back to fantasy role-playing for 2 decades. So, I mean, I didn't give a shit. I was like, you guys are broken. I don't have any of the 2nd edition D&D. I didn't really get back into fantasy role-playing for a very long time. I said there was a renaissance. I mean, now I know there were some great games back there in the 70s. But really, what took off and what happened to fantasy fiction? Fuck fantasy fiction after 1985. I'm not interested, with very few exceptions. So
Yep.
basically, what I'm trying to say is that it is a source of extreme grief to me that I wasn't in contact with people who were producing quality role playing fantasy material that I didn't see. It is to read those magazines today might send me on a rampage up and down the streets screaming at the heavens.
Excellent. It'll be worth it.
Well,
Especially if
yes,
they
but
open.
that's 20 years of lost gaming fun that I'm looking at. And so anyway, I'm just kind of giving you a bit of, my rant that yes, of course I'm going to go and pay the $25, but you will hear the scream all the way from Sweden when I
then
read
I'll
an
hear the happy
article that I
noises.
would have died for in 1981.
Yeah. Yeah, but it'll do you good.
Yeah.
It'll do you good.
Well, so
anyway,
let's get back to the white thing, because I think I got your point, and so I'm not finger wagging or anything. Right?
No, I don't feel finger wagged at all.
Just want to check on that. So can I tell you my thing or not?
Tell me your thing.
Okay. Which is, there's that bit that I quoted in the document that I posted at Facebook, the bit from the early rule book, which is all about, look, this is Rustum's, this is Conan, this is, the Grey Mouser, and it's not, Sir Lancelot.
Yep.
And I really took that to heart in 1980. I said, I get it. And I get it totally. And even if we are going to throw in a Morning Star mace, even if we are going to make some reference to Robert E. Howard, we're going to recognize that as rule of cool, and we're going to stay over there in Mesopotamia. Thank you very much. And I also tuned into it because one thing I picked up as a young reader was that the very earliest Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories were actually set in Tyre.
Yes.
And that they retrofitted some of those stories into Lankhmar later.
Yeah.
And a couple where they couldn't, they klooched, like Adept's Gambit. But the rest, a few others got sort of Lankhmarred. And that struck me as interesting because, the Grey Mouser is a native of Lankhmar, and Fafhrd is very much a white-skinned foreigner. And I said, well, wait a minute. That means I went and looked up, his descriptions of the Grey Mouser, and to use the verbiage of the late 50s, olive-skinned is the euphemism.
Yeah.
And so I looked down and I said, fuck, man, the Grey Mouser's an Arab. I get it. And so, I took that to heart very much as a young reader. I don't know if that was uniquely so, but it feels uniquely so. And
I think the nearest thing to that I had was probably it would have been Ursula Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea. When
Wizard of Earthsea was also when you finally realized
outside of civilization are the only whites in it.
Exactly. When you realize that Ged and his people are effectively Native Americans, when you realize that his best friend from school is black, it's there, but you have to realize it's there as a white reader.
Yeah.
And so anyway, yes, I remember that as well. So anyway, to me, in the extraordinary frustration I was having with the ahistorical Disney fantasy that D&D was turning into.
Yep.
I just was latched onto that. So I am speaking not as a critic, but only as a user. When I say every time I saw a Celt or a Viking in RuneQuest art, or a very British-looking Roman fellow, right? I said to myself, all right, I get it. Even though I wasn't a game publisher at the time, I was in on role-playing very much toward the beginning, and I know the nature of the publications. They're zines. Yeah. They are totally underground, out of the copy shop publishing.
Oh, absolutely. Greg used to wax lyrical about his old mimeograph printer.
Of course. And so, even calling these things editions.
The smell of it and the amount of yourself that went into the stuff you're producing.
Right. And even the whole idea of editions, whenever anyone says editions, I just laugh. You know, it's like, well, I play first edition D&D, and I'm like, the very fact you said that means you have no concept of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
These are not editions. It is a spray of indie pub, period.
Yep.
So here's my point. In those conditions, you have two situations for art. One, you've got a buddy who's a crazy fucker who's drawing perfect art for your game because they play it.
Yep.
One. Two, you take whatever art you can get. Whatever it is. And that's it. And that actually persisted for a really long time. It wasn't until pretty much FASA hit the scene in 1989 that even began to change. Up until then, that was pretty much exactly the case for any game, any time. So,
you either had somebody who knew the author and knew the setting and was talented,
right,
or
you got what you got. And of course, the curse of the matter is
we've had regression, of course, since then, because the mongoose art model is.
Before we diverge,
let's not go there.
Before your voluminous footnotes fill the entire zone, I want to go back precisely to this moment, and I want to say that that we had in Chaosium, you did have a couple of these particular, people who were playing when, the Jacquet's Crimson Bat, the cover of Cults of Terror, all that kind of thing. When that crops up, that they're right there in the beating heart of it.
Yep. These are people who get it.
But as it happens, they also had to get what they could get.
Yep.
So, and then of course we're not even counting, or we should count properly, all of the unstoppable user base art, which is going to be exactly whatever they felt like drawing and nothing more.
Yeah.
And so with all this going on, it is absolutely impossible to expect a whole bunch of Arab and Mesopotamian imagery to emerge. It's not going to happen. No. Not in America and not in the UK. It's just not going to happen.
It kind of would happen if you'd launched your game the way Techumel launches, festooned with weird exotic alien art.
Yes,
or
possibly.
If you were doing what TSR did when they launched Al-Qadim, and you've got a setting which is entirely derivatively Arabian Nights-ish. But they didn't do that with RuneQuest.
Right, let's base that on a couple things. Number one, the TSR one, and I don't think we're arguing here. I think I'm just kind of footnoting your footnote, which is that the TSR one is not until the early 90s, and they're working on the fumes of the Williams money. And so that's one thing. And they also have art direction and a whole different atmosphere of publishing.
And also, it's entirely derivative. I mean,
it's not exactly
fancy Arabian Nights Sinbad movie art.
Well, not only that, it's top down. It's corporate mandated. It's not bottom up from play. Period.
Whereas if you're talking about illustrating an alien world correctly, which is the case with Techumel and probably should be with RuneQuest, that doesn't happen.
Correct. Now, Techumel is a very interesting thing because it's a proper comparison, especially because we're talking about two very equivalent situations. A small community of people who've really got a personal vision of the kind of fantasy they're talking about, and they're fucking inventing role-playing in front of our eyes. Gygax, me no Gygaxes, Arneson, me no Arnesons.
This is the thing I find fascinating, is that Techumel had an existence and an existence in games before role-playing, just like Glorantha.
Absolutely correct. And so all of this is going on, and what I'm trying to say is that Techumel suffered in many ways from perhaps an important and powerful and unfortunate trade-off. That either you've got this central visionary, really only know it if you feel it and if you do it kind of imagery, which means you have one whole artist during the 70s and early 80s who's Barker himself.
Exactly.
And then, on the other hand, you do the precise opposite, which is Glorantha very naively saying, "Come ye all, come ye hither, and what you create can become canon," which is very, very laudable in many ways, although bluntly, it's diluted.
I don't recall that.
Well, this is
something I've tracked quite closely. I don't recall ever being told, "Come ye hither, do anything you want, it's canon."
No, I get that. I'm overstating it. I'm talking about the way it was perceived, Nick.
Okay.
The way it was perceived was precisely that. And so the notion that, now granted, they were open to submission, they were open to inclusion. The sense of inclusion and discovery was real.
If I may, there was something that we toyed with in the 90s. I think the abbreviation folk use was generally accepted Glorantha, which meant if enough people have been talking about a particular idea as if it's valid, then probably you ought to take it into account.
Sure.
That annoyed people who came along after these discussions in exactly the same way as it would annoy you if you'd missed the founding issues of a fanzine and people referred you back to stuff you had no access to.
No, I completely get all this.
I think that's a bit different to saying that if you wrote something, it was canon. It was, if you could make a case for something and enough people went along with it, then there was a general feeling that you should take it into account.
Sure.
And I mean, my example.
Let's put Tecumseh at one end, which is, Barker's way, case closed, and Barker does the art. Because I'm talking about art and depiction.
Oh,
okay, that's
something you might not know.
And then way on the other end, you have what I completely, and you're right to say, completely overstated. That's at the far end of the spectrum, which is anybody and everybody is an author.
Yep.
Okay? Glorantha is way closer to that second end than it is the first end in practice.
Well, that was Greg Public said that was what he'd always wanted.
Right.
It was what the creator of the world was saying.
Right.
In the 80s, there were I think it was the last words in the orange box were Glorantha is yours now, not mine. I was wanting to get a whole bunch of people collaborating on building this thing, and I achieved that.
That's what I'm saying.
It's a nice message. That's without that. I probably
so
wouldn't
hold
have
on,
got
we're
into doing
still
things
not to my point, right? I let you talk about Carmanians for 20 minutes in a row, okay? So you let me get to this one, which is this. Here I am, and I have I'm looking at this stuff, and I'm seeing that again and again the Western European imagery is cropping up, and I am saying that I totally get why. When you're contributing, you're going to contribute the way you saw it in your mind's eye, and that was in people's mind's eye.
Wow.
I totally get that.
Yeah. There's also little details that lead people a long way, like the descriptions of the Orlanthi as using woad and wearing torques do take you down a particularly Celtic path.
I get that, and the question
hard
is,
to avoid.
You can probably track the timing on that better than I can. But
Mid-80s.
I'm going to say that back in the very much in the mid 80s, a lot of that, when you're only holding, especially if you're holding, as we said, a somewhat personal, archaeological, incomplete handful of things, it's not real easy to identify anything as leading you anywhere. So
okay, the other one that led you somewhere in the early 80s was Greg using distinctly Viking type names for Orlanthi in the fiction that accompanied Cults of Terror.
Mm-hmm. Right. And
Oddie the Keen and the like.
Yeah,
and then in the early 90s, the original name of what he translated allegedly as the Kolimar book was Kolimar's book.
When you get up to the King to King of Sartar and stuff like that, then I agree that something about the whole thing snaps into Ulster really fast.
Yeah.
Right. I completely get that. And you can see bits and pieces. I mean, Glorantha has always been syncretic in many ways. And they were referring to Njaal's saga all the way back in the same book that I'm talking about.
And this is part of the joy of the way RuneQuest 3 in particular, by saying you've got nomad cultures and barbarian cultures and civilized cultures. And at that point, it doesn't really matter whether you're in the West or the East or the South or somewhere in between.
But remember, you're talking to the person who is inspired by the paragraph in question. Because I'm not talking as a publisher here. And I'm certainly not talking as a critic who's kind of trying to take a broader and comparative and analytical view. I'm talking as a fucking user.
Yes.
Right? Me, myself, and I.
And
so in that, I'm looking at this, and when I see Greg getting, Celtic with his woad, I'm the one rolling my eyes to the heaven and saying, you know what? You've got your Greg, and I've got mine. And mine wrote the paragraph I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And I'm listening to that Greg. And I don't even care if you're the real Greg. And so this is, and remember, I'm not part of fandom. I wasn't on any of the lists. I wasn't on any of the communities. Nobody gave a shit what I thought. So I wasn't part of it. So I wasn't even in the whole zone in the early 90s that you were living and breathing of, oh my God, what did Greg say Tuesday? Right? I'm not there. So I'm looking at this material, and when I see, and I'm going to give a great deal of credit to the promotional power of King of Dragon Pass, the computer game. I'm going to give an enormous amount of credit, and it's clearly a labor of love. But visually, I swear to God, there are bloodstains on my wall from where I banged my head into it. Because we're talking about Ulster. We're talking about Northern Ireland, and we're talking about those fucking cows. And we're talking about that they wrote whole epics about cow stealing, okay? Big whoop. Yeah. And I'm saying, I don't want to talk about epics about cow stealing on some fucking godforsaken island way out there in the hinterland. I was over there back in Tyre. So
the cow stealing thing probably was an insert from the group called the Seattle Farmers Collective.
Right. Which is fine.
I know that
that's interesting, actually. Go on. Sorry, go ahead.
Jeff Richard, who is now the creative director for Chaosium,
absolutely,
is a huge enthusiast for a book called Cattle Lords and Clansmen, which, as I say, he's a lawyer. He's an all-anthe enthusiast. We used to debate on other sides. I do the
yes,
perspective, he do the all-anthe perspective at cons. And he can do this stuff very fluently. And he had a great interest in understanding kinship structures and dispute resolution mechanisms and the like. But the Seattle Farmers Collective, it's a self-mocking name, much as the Reaching Moon Megacorp was. Because people from outside the group said, how can it be interesting you're playing a game about being farmers and chasing cows? In, much the same way as people outside our group said, gee, you guys seem to really love the Lunars. And
yeah, what's wrong with you? You're playing the bad guys. Oh my God.
And you're probably some kind of commies as well.
Exactly,
and it's bizarre. It's as if they can't read what we write. We say, we wanted an evil empire with an ideology.
I have a certain sympathy. I have a certain sympathy for anybody who has been confronted by any number of critics who haven't apparently been able to read what they wrote.
I get you.
Yeah, that I definitely know what you mean, that's a reality.
Yeah.